So as you can see, we've actually been incredibly busy over the last 7 years. As John indicated, we have over 50 companies that we would now classify as green tech investments at KP. One thing that I think differentiates how we invest from some other venture firms in this area is that we haven't gone after simply the companies that look like information technology companies as applied to green, but we've really looked at the whole spectrum. Everything from supply side, those are the big renewables, to efficiency companies, to transportation. And so I'm going to highlight a few of the companies in our portfolio, and please, if you have any specific questions about any one of these companies, we're going to have a big Q&A session, and feel free to ask us some more detail then. As John pointed out, we're less than 6% of all of our energy comes from renewables. So we saw a huge opportunity to ramp that up, and we also saw a lot of entrepreneurs who were coming to us with really deep fundamental innovations in this area. As you can see, we have a lot of stealth solar companies. A lot of times in our early technology companies, we don't like to be very explicit about what technology we're developing, but we have several companies that are focused on next generation, high efficiency, lower cost solar. We have large scale solar through solar thermal companies. We're investing in geothermal. We're investing in fuel cells. So we have a very nice portfolio on the supply side that is really atypical for venture, but again, like we said, it's a really big leverage point for our energy economy going forward. We've also spent a lot of time in renewable fuels, and you can see that we have quite a few fuels portfolios. Now, this is a sector that's gotten a lot of negative press lately for people who've gone after corn ethanol and basically taking food and trying to convert it to fuel. We've stayed away from that for the most part and are really focused on the garbage part of the, rather than taking the fruits, we're taking the parts that would otherwise be burnt or destroyed, or people haven't been able to convert into other useful things. So we have looked at every possible way, chemical processes, physical processes, to convert that cellulose not only into fuels, but also into useful chemical precursors. So we see a lot of exciting innovation and activity going on in this area, despite what you may be hearing from the market and the press. Energy efficiency is really a catch-all for a lot of technologies that are on what we call the demand side of the market. It's how you use the energy. And this is really about smarter energy usage, making processes that are less energy intensive. And so this is a broad range of companies. But there's one company in here I'd like to point out, because it's part of a whole ecosystem of companies that we're all hearing a lot more about these days, and that's called the smart grid. And if you look around and you look at all the networks that exist around us, the electric grid is one of the dumbest there is out there. It was invented 100 years ago and really has not been updated since. And the best way to describe Silver Spring is it's really overlaying the internet on top of the electric grid. You may have heard this, but if the electricity goes out at your house, right now the only way that the utility company knows about it is if you call them up and tell them. It's a really, truly dumb grid. And technology like Silver Spring, what that means by laying the internet over the top of it, you're essentially creating two-way communication points between all the nodes on the grid. So now you start to enable whole sets of ecosystems of technologies that no one has ever been able to think about before. We're at the very, very early stages of that, and our portfolio company Silver Spring is one of the big leaders in this area. And PG&E is one of their big partners, and you may have heard, but we just recently rolled out the 1 millionth node on the Silver Spring network in the Bay Area. So there's actually some incredibly exciting stuff going on in the smart grid. The last area that I want to point out today in our green portfolio is really transportation and storage. A lot of people talk about batteries being a key innovation piece for not only renewables performing better, but for transportation. Batteries are incredibly important. So this is an area where we have several stealth companies that are innovating on new chemistries, better efficiencies, that we think over time will be able to make electric vehicles, renewables on the grid far more usable because we have appropriate and cost-effective storage techniques. The last company I just wanted to highlight is one that I spend a lot of time on and know well, is in the transportation sector, and that's the Fisker. You may have heard a little bit about what they're doing, but the timing of investing in a company like that is actually pretty extraordinary right now. If you think about the automotive industry, it's existed since the late 1800s, not a ton of innovation. And so for the first time, you've got this whole electrification of the drivetrain, big technology shift happening. And if you look at other industries, historically those major technology shifts don't normally come from the big incumbents. So we've got this opportunity for new companies who are focused on this new technology to come in, and meanwhile the big companies are fighting with insolvency and lots of other just macroeconomic issues. So it really is an extraordinary time to be investing in the electrification of the drivetrain. That's exactly what we're doing with a company like Fisker. And so that's a quick snapshot, and with that I'll hand it back over to John.